Theory of demand. So firstly, we should know the meaning of demand. Ordinarily, demand means a desire, whereas in economic sense it is something more than a mere desire. In economics, we are concerned with demand faced by the firm for a commodity. This depends upon the size of the total market or the industry demand for the commodity, which in turn is the sum of the demands for the commodity of the individual consumers in the market. The amount of particular economic goods that a consumer would like to purchase at the prevailing price is called demand. Demand for a commodity implies desire to acquire it, willingness to pay for it, and ability to pay for it. Economists record demand on a demand schedule and plot it on a graph as a demand curve that is usually downward sloping. Demand varies with fluctuations in the factors like time, its price, and that of related commodities, consumers' income and taste, etc. There are various types of demand. Autonomous and derived demand. The goods whose demand is not tied with the demand for some other goods are said to have autonomous demand, while the rest have derived demand. Firm and industry demand. Demand faced by a single firm in the industry is firm demand, say demand faced by Reliance Petrochemicals, while demand faced by all the firms collectively are called industry demands, like demand faced by petrochemical industry. Demand by market segments and by total market. If the market is large in terms of geographical spread, product uses, distribution channels, customer size, or product varieties, and if any one or more of these differences were significant in terms of product price, profit margins, competition, seasonal patterns, or cyclical sensitivity, then it may be worthwhile to distinguish the market by specific segments for a meaningful analysis. In that case, the total demand would mean the total demand for the product from all market segments, while a particular market segment demand would refer to demand for the product in that specific market segment. Demand for consumer and producer goods. The goods, such as bread and butter, clothes and houses, which when used render direct satisfaction to their consumers, are called consumer goods. The goods, such as machine and raw cotton, which are used for the production of other goods, are called producers' goods. Demand for perishable and durable goods. Both consumer goods and producers' goods are further classified into perishable or non-durable or single-use goods, and durable or non-perishable repeated-use goods. The former refers to final output like bread or raw material like cement, which can be used only once. The latter refers to items like shirt, car, or a machine, which can be used repeatedly. In other words, we can classify goods into several categories: single-use consumer goods, single-use producer goods, durable-use consumer goods, and durable-use producers' goods. This distinction is useful because durable products present more complicated problems of demand analysis than perishable products. Non-durable items are meant for meeting immediate or current demand, but durable items are designed to meet current as well as future demands as they are used. After studying this lesson, you should be able to analyze the nature of demand, learn the concept of law of demand, analyze the factors affecting demand, differentiate between market demand and individual demand, differentiate between movement along the demand curve and shift in demand curve. Now we can discuss the law of demand. Law of demand states that the amount demanded of a commodity and its price are inversely related, other things remaining constant. That is, if the income of the consumer, prices of the related goods, and tastes and preferences of the consumer remain unchanged, the consumer's demand for the good will move opposite to the movement in the price of the good. If the price of the good increases, the quantity demanded decreases, while if the price of the good decreases, its quantity demanded increases. Qx equals to Fpx, where Qx is the quantity demanded of x goods, F is the function, and Px is the price of x goods. The demand function can be described as under. The demand theory postulates that the quantity demanded of a commodity is a function of or depends on not only the price of a commodity but also income, price of related goods, both substitutes and complements, taste of consumer, price, expectation, and all other factors. Demand function is a comprehensive formulation which specifies the factors that influence the demand for the product. Dx equals to F, Px, Py, Pz, B, A, E, T, U, where Dx equals to demand for item X, Px equals to price of item X, Py equals to price of substitutes, Pz equals to price of complements, B equals to income of consumer, A equals to advertisement expense, E equals to price expectation of the user, T equals to taste or preference of user, U equals to all other factors. The impact of these determinants on demand is price effect on demand. Demand for X is inversely related to its own price. Substitution effect on demand. If Y is a substitute of X, then as price of Y increases, demand for X also increases. Complementary effect on demand. If Z is a complement of X, then as the price of Z falls, the demand for Z goes up, and thus the demand for X also tends to rise. Price expectation effect on demand. Here the relation may not be definite as the psychology of the consumer comes into play. Income effect on demand. As income rises, consumers buy more of normal good, positive effect, and less of inferior goods, negative effect. Promotional effect on demand. Advertisement increases the sale of a firm up to a point. After discussing law of demand, we can better understand individual demand, which leads to derivation of market demand. The consumer equilibrium condition determines the quantity of each good the individual consumer will demand. As the example here illustrates, the individual consumer's demand for a particular good, call it good X, will satisfy the law of demand and can therefore be depicted by a downward sloping individual demand curve. The individual consumer, however, is only one of the many participants in the market for good X. The market demand curve for good X includes the quantities of good X demanded by all participants in the market for good X. The market demand curve is found by taking the horizontal summation of all individual demand curves. For example, suppose that there were just two consumers in the market for good X, consumer 1 and consumer 2. These two consumers have different individual demand curves corresponding to their different preferences for good X. The two individual demand curves are depicted in figure 1 along with the market demand curve for good X. The market demand curve for good X is found by summing together the quantities that both consumers demand at each price. For example, at a price of $1, consumer 1 demands 2 units, while consumer 2 demands 1 unit. So the market demand is 2 plus 1 equals to 3 units of good X. In more general settings, where there are more than 2 consumers in the market for some good, the same principle continues to apply. The market demand curve would be the horizontal summation of all the market participants' individual demand curve. Demand also leads to changes in its curve called increase in demand, decrease in demand. When consumers increase the quantity demanded at a given price, it is referred to as an increase in demand. Increased demand can be represented on the graph as the curve being shifted to the right. At each price point, a greater quantity is demanded, as from the initial curve D1 to the new curve D2. If the demand decreases, then the opposite happens, a shift of the curve to the left. If the demand starts at D2 and decreases to D1, the equilibrium price will decrease and the equilibrium quantity will also decrease. The quantity supplied at each price is the same as before the demand shift, reflecting the fact that the supply curve has not shifted, but the equilibrium quantity and price are different as a result of the change or shift in demand. A movement along the curve is described as a change in the quantity demanded to distinguish it from a change in demand, that is, a shift of the curve. In the above case, there has been an increase in demand which has caused an increase in equilibrium quantity. The increase in demand could also come from changing tastes and fashions, income, price changes in complementary and substitute goods, market expectations, and a number of buyers. This would cause the entire demand curve to shift, changing the equilibrium price and quantity. Generally, the amount demanded of good increases with a decrease in price of the good and vice versa. In some cases, however, this may not be true. Such situations are explained below. Given goods. As noted earlier, if there is an inferior good of which the positive income effect is greater than the negative substitution effect, the law of demand would not hold. For example, when the price of potatoes, which is the staple food of some poor families, decreases significantly, then a particular household may like to buy superior goods out of the savings which they can have now, due to superior goods like cereals, fruits, etc., not only from these savings but also by reducing the consumption of potatoes. Thus, a decrease in price of potatoes results in decrease in consumption of potatoes. Such basic good items like bajra, barley, grain, etc. consumed in bulk by the poor families generally fall in the category of given goods. Commodities which are used as status symbols. Some expensive commodities like diamonds, air-conditioned cars, etc. are used as status symbols to display one's wealth. The more expensive these commodities become, the higher their value as a status symbol, and hence the greater the demand for them. The amount demanded of these commodities increase with an increase in their price and decrease with a decrease in their price, also known as Veblen good. Expectation of change in the price of a commodity. If a household expects the price of a commodity to increase, it may start purchasing greater amount of the commodity even at the presently increased price. Similarly, if the household expects the price of the commodity to decrease, it may postpone its purchases. Thus, law of demand is violated in such cases. In the above circumstance, the demand curve does not slope down from left to right. Instead, it presents a backward sloping from top right to down left, as shown in diagram. This curve is known as exceptional demand curve. Now, things to remember when considering a demand curve are: a demand curve follows the law of demand. When a price rises, quantity demanded falls, and vice versa. The horizontal axis, quantity, has a time dimension. The quantities are of the same quality. The vertical axis, price, is a relative price. The curve assumes that everything else is held constant. Effects of price changes are shown by movements along the demand curve. Effects of anything else on demand shift factors are shown by shifts of the entire demand curve. Now let's discuss demand forecasting and determinants of demand. Demand estimation of any firm's product is performed by forecasting the firm's sales. Demand estimation is to determine the approximate level of demand for the product whereas demand forecasting is estimating the quantity of product or service that consumers will purchase. Demand estimation is an important technique for demand forecasting. Forecasts can be classified into two broad categories: passive forecasts, active forecasts. Passive forecast is one where prediction about the future is based on the assumption that the firm does not change the course of its action. An active forecast is where forecasting is done under the condition of likely future changes in the actions by the firm. Now let's find out the determinants of demand. The determinants of demand are also known as demand shifters. They result in the leftward decrease or rightward increase shifts in the demand curve. Tastes or preferences of consumers. An increased taste in a product increases its demand. A decreased taste in a product decreases its demand. Number of consumers in the market. More consumer increases a product demand, while fewer consumers decreases a product demand. The money incomes of consumers. Superior goods or normal goods. As income increases, a superior goods demand increases. As income decreases, a superior goods demand decreases. Superior goods are most common goods. Inferior goods. As income increases, an inferior goods demand decreases. As income decreases, an inferior goods demand increases. Prices of related goods. Substitute goods. As price of A increases, demand for B decreases. As price of A decreases, demand for B decreases. Example, Nike and Reebok. Complementary goods. As price of A increases, demand for B decreases. As price of B decreases, demand for A increases. Example, computers and computer games, gasoline and motor oil. Independent goods. As price of good A changes, demand for good B does not change. Consumer expectations about the future prices and income. If consumers expect a price increase in near future, demand increases. If consumers expect a price decrease in the near future, demand decreases. Now let us check if we have understood the various concepts discussed in this lesson clearly. A shift of the demand curve to the right indicates an increase in demand. Right or wrong? Right. The market demand is the demand faced by the whole firm. Right or wrong? Wrong. While drawing a demand curve, the quantity of goods is represented on the vertical axis. Right or wrong? Wrong. Given goods are goods of superior quality which are an exception to the law of demand. Right or wrong? Wrong. Let's revise. In economics, demand has a specific meaning. Demand for any commodity implies desire to acquire it, willingness to pay for it, ability to pay for it, and a particular time. There are different types of demand. X, for example, demand for consumer goods and producer goods, perishable goods and durable goods, autonomous and derived demand, individual and market demand, firm and industry demand. Demand depends on not only the price of a commodity, but also income, price of related goods, both substitutes and complements, taste of consumer, price expectation, and all other factors. The inverse relationship between the price of a commodity and the quantity demanded per time period is referred to as the law of demand.